This is the Authority Company podcast, in-depth conversations with business leaders who are shaping the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and culture can be complicated, but Jennifer N. Sutherland is here to uncomplicate it. Jennifer runs Sutherland Talent Solutions, where she provides consulting for career path growth, resume reviews, or interviewing preparation. And she's made it her mission to educate the next generation in HR and learning and development. Jennifer Sutherland, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Jennifer. And so I want to start talking, Jennifer, because I don't want to date ourselves, but I think both you and I are old enough to remember days when the word culture was not spoken about in offices,
Yes.
and the idea of calling people talent was not a thing. They were employees. So you've gotten to see this evolution on the ground floor. And I think for the better. I think we could all agree for the better. But tell me about how we've evolved in terms of how companies operate and the world of culture and talent.
I think that's a great question because we have now recognized that, yes, businesses need to make revenue, but it's the people that make it happen. And we are no longer just resources as a human, that we have personal lives, that we have goals, that we have things outside of work, but we also have our own intentions and how we interact and we bring our whole selves to work. And so it is kind of interesting how that has evolved over time. If I think about, say, my dad, when he first started his career, nobody cared about that. You come in when you come in, you're supposed to be there and you get your work done and then you leave and nobody really cares what you do after that. Now we have things like affinity groups at work that where you can share your culture with somebody else that has a similar culture or interest in your culture. And so, yes, that idea of what culture is at a work environment and then the fact that we are talent. We truly have talent. And I love that word because I used to be involved in things like dance and cheerleading and things like that. And that's a talent, right? You think about a talent show, you're bringing your talent to work. So, what is your talent that you bring? So, it's really interesting to think about that blend and how things have evolved in a work environment that we now have to recognize that. And companies that don't recognize that are still trying to do things the traditional way, are not very successful. They are sort of falling by the wayside and sort of challenge to bring all of that to the forefront because employees are expecting that now.
Now, Jennifer, people who know me, work with me, I drive them crazy because I despise checklist culture. And to me,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you may be, this is my own vernacular, but the idea of doing something to check the box, like having a meeting because we have to have this meeting, doing this thing because this is the way it's always been done, and
Yeah.
people handle culture that way too, where you'll see leaders come in and be like, okay, let's fix up culture. We're going to hire a consultant. We're going to sign up for all these apps. We're going to have people check in digitally. We're going to do all these different things to help culture. And they're just going through the proverbial motions.
Yes.
How, but then there's a sticky wicket, right? Because like you need to do those things, but also
Right.
not, but not
Right.
mindlessly. So tell us how we toe
Exactly.
that line.
If you're doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons, it still doesn't have the outcome it's supposed to. So employees can tell what's the onus behind it. Is there intentionality behind the activities? If there's not, it falls flat and employees see right through it. You can buy the best like tool whatsoever to onboard somebody, but if there's nothing behind it, no sort of substance to it, employees know that. So you can add the bells and whistles and send them the best welcome gift you want, but it doesn't matter, it'll fall flat. So it's a really it's a really sticky place to be, like you said, because when you think about things like compliance training has always been a tick the box. We have to do it because there's government regulations, there's things you have to do, it's expected, whatever. But then you can also add additional compliance training that is interesting and engaging and helps leaders to better lead their employees. Or on a culture side, there are amazing tools that you can add to your onboarding experience. If you do it well, it has such a significant impact, but it has to be a good process over that. So you can't just have a bad process and add some technology and hope it's going to work. You have to do it for the right reasons. And I think thinking about like cultural values that companies have is a great example. When companies are just like, yeah, these things rhyme and they make a word, that sounds great. Okay, but do those words resonate? Do they actually make sense to the employee? Have you had any focus groups to talk about those topics? How do we share that? Or is it just something that looks good on a website and to new potential employees? But then all the internal employees are like, yeah, we don't do any of that. Now, culture is tricky though, because you can't immediately create culture. Culture is just how people interact with each other at work. It's how work gets done, it's how leaders lead their employees, how they interact with each other. So you can't just go, okay, one, two, three, four, we've done this. But then over time, you start to see how it evolves. And you start to see, is it starting to become part of our vernacular? Are people using that terminology when we interact with each other? Is it embedded in all of our processes? So, for example, if you do have cultural values, making sure that they're embedded in things like your recognition programs, like your performance management process. I worked for a company once that, as a leader, I had leadership competencies that I was evaluated on that I also evaluated myself. So my leader evaluated me and I evaluated me. And then we also, every employee had to evaluate themselves on the cultural values, and every employee had to lead, or their leader had to evaluate them on the cultural values. So to me, when you start to make that a part of the embedded part of your organization and it's in these various parts, then that's truly culture. Otherwise, it is just a tick the box. It's just a, oh, we're supposed to have cultural values. Oh, we're supposed to do this. I'll give you another example. If you ask most employees in their organization, what is our company's mission? What's our company value statement or our vision statement? Most employees aren't going to know because companies create those to put on a website or their annual report, their stockholder report, but it's not a part of the organization. So employees don't know even how to say, what is our mission? We don't know what's the one thing that we're trying to do? What's the mission? What's the vision? And those things just get sort of check the box. Okay, we have to do it and we do it. But until like the employees own it and it's a part of like the day-to-day experience and culture, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and we've all heard the you've probably heard more than I have the horror stories of culture because I mean, Enron, famously the corrupt company, had a culture and they had virtues and all this stuff. And I have someone the other
Mhm.
day was telling me the story how a company for whatever reason put the cultures on the floor of the building, so people were literally walking on the culture. Like it's like there's so
Okay.
many bad things that come out of this. Like maybe
Yes.
some intentions, but bad comes of it. And I've always
Right.
felt, for me, it was always difficult going from my radio background of then working to going to a corporate culture because when working in radio, we were, basically you only had a meeting when you were in trouble. Like, oh shoot, we have to have a meeting because what did I do or what did they do? And then I came into a corporate culture where it was like, yeah, we have regular huddles every day and we have these meetings we do quarterly. And it's
Oh,
like, wow, how does anything get done here? And obviously it does, but it is hard to grasp. Like and my example is kind of weird because I came from a non-meeting type world, be creative, but then into a meeting style. But in most places, they're not all created the same. So some places may be heavy with meetings. Some people maybe were like, hey, total autonomy for employees. Do your thing. You're only get called in if there is trouble. So, how does that work when it comes to introducing new team members? Because, like we said, every company's different. They're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to have a great culture, like we've been explaining, but not everyone's prepared for that. How do you, and for lack of a word, break people in to your culture?
right. I I love this question so much because every company I've worked for is very different. I've worked for very large companies, small companies. I've been a big team or small team. So I've been sort of all over. And it really is about that concept of the onboarding and setting those sort of expectations of what work is like there. Uh, Everybody I know, whenever you interview, you always ask, so what's the company culture like? And whoever you're talking to is going to tell you something. It is probably a portion of the truth. And so when an employee starts as a new business, it's kind of walking in the door like, what do I do? How do I do this? Now, some of the key things that employees or companies can do to help employees be integrated into the company, understand, and sort of onboard effectively is make sure there's a really good first day conversation. Here's what our basic company is. Here's sort of where you can find the key things. Let's make sure you can get into your systems. And that applies to both in person or remote, which I like. So you can do those same things in a remote environment. But then what about that day-to-day sort of like the true, how do we work here type of thing? A lot of companies will implement something like a buddy program. And that buddy program could be somebody in their own team that maybe their manager select somebody, or it could be a more broad company program, which I really prefer, so that it's somebody that might not be, you would normally not interact with on a regular basis, but can say, here's how we really do things. Like that Monday morning meeting, don't ever skip that. Like when we do these town halls, make sure you're on camera. What's sort of the expectation? Those are the kind of cool things. Like, here's where our travel policy is. This is the non-negotiables you need to know. Here's like the key decision makers in our company. People have this title, but here's the one person that really has a lot of influence. So a buddy program can really help a new hire feel comfortable in that environment and give them somebody sort of built in from day one that they can go to and ask those questions, because it's daunting to start a new company, whether you are starting in as an entry level employee or you're an executive. Probably even sometimes worse if you're an executive, because you walk in and people think, oh, you know what you're doing and everything that you need to know here. Probably not, right? They still need to get the lay of the land. And a lot of that does have to do with that buddy program. But if it's not a buddy program, you can have all these really cool internal resources that can tell some of those stories. And it can be fun stuff. You can do little animated videos that you can upload to, whether it's the company SharePoint site or their learning management system, whatever the case may be, that they can go and look and say, okay, I have a question about how do I fill out my expense report? And then they're like, I don't even know where to go to start. And they can do a search. Maybe there's an AI bot even that can help them with that. But they can get just like a short little video, like, here's the key things, but make sure you send it and don't forget to include this information. Like some of those process type of things can really, really help a new hire feel less overwhelmed, but feel more connected to things. And then talking about cultural values to me is really key. So making sure employees don't just know the processes and systems and those types of expectations, but also how do they learn the cultural values? Like, is it just a list somewhere? Or is it something that's truly embedded? I've known some companies that actually will write it out like in a card and laminate it and give it to every employee. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Quicken Loans, based in Detroit, Michigan, but they actually have a really cool animated book that they call Isms, and it's all about their Quicken Loan isms and Rock Financial and all of that. And it's really cool because they do a introduction to that book of their isms of what they do to make them who they are. And it's actually open up to the public. So people can just sign up to actually attend that. That's not even an employee. I have one in my office, and it's like just a really cool introduction to who they are. I guarantee you, new employees there know exactly what their culture is like. They know exactly what to expect. They know what they're looking forward to when they walk in the door. It's not just sort of a nuanced, oh, here's a list. But we do things like have the cultural values, for example, as the background on their company laptop. So every time they log in, boom, it's right there. It's a reminder every day. Or send people out like a one pager that they can print and they could put somewhere. When I used to work in a building, we'd have things on our key badges, right? So that every time I'd badge in, I'd be like, oh, the other side has our cultural values or has our leadership competencies or whatever the case may be. All those are really cool things that a company can do to make sure. Now, I'm just going to say most companies, I shouldn't say most companies, that sounds arbitrary. Many companies don't do that, and they think it's not worth the effort or it doesn't have the impact, but I would absolutely disagree. The companies that I've worked for that really focus on putting time and effort and intentionality behind bringing on new hires and make sure they understand the culture really have a much different level of success, in my opinion, than companies that don't.
I love that. And I love the buddy system. That's a great idea. I think more and more companies should take that on. Now, I will say personally, I'm a bit of an odd duck because I am a self-starter. I am my own toughest critic. So I've even told my boss this, that like my values are work hard, make great stuff, and be nice to people. And I know my company has like more complicated values than that. But I always like to keep things very simple because I'm a very simple
Yeah.
man, Jennifer, as you can tell. So do you think sometimes companies overcomplicate it? Like I said, like my values are like, make sure I do great work, be nice to
Right,
all the other
right,
people I'm at, and then like,
right.
just show up and be on time and all that stuff. Do we overcomplicate it sometimes?
Oh, I would say absolutely. I don't think there needs to be a 3-hour training on the cultural values, for example. I think that the cultural values should be simple and basic enough that people understand them by reading them. You shouldn't have to go through a list of saying, what does that actually mean? Because, oh, we created a really cool word, or we went to the thesaurus and found something like that. We don't really use that word normally. Like, wow, that looks really good on a piece of paper. So yes, definitely companies over complicated, and keeping it simple to make sure that is what it is. Like doing the right thing, treating people well, being nice to each other, treating each other with respect. That should always be sort of assumed. But one of the reasons it's typically, I shouldn't say, well, maybe there's many reasons it would be documented, but one of the reasons is the employee or the company can actually point back to it. So they could say, hey, remember we talked about respecting each other? And in that meeting, when you disagreed with that person, you were a little disrespectful in how you handled it. So that's one of the reasons why companies sort of document some of these things is that they can point back to it when they have to talk about a behavior so that it's not talking about the person or their personality, but it's about a behavior and how it ties to something that's been accepted company wide. It also, from a leadership perspective, makes it easier to coach somebody and give them feedback that could be helpful from a criticism perspective and say, here's what I saw, and here's what the expectation is, and here would be my assumption or my expectation for how you would do that differently. So it allows for a better conversation. But yes, you can definitely overcomplicate it by adding way too many elements. I mean, if there's more than probably 5 cultural values, it's probably too many. There's probably less there than you need. So those are the kind of things that I think some companies do, and it's also a really good framework for how you start projects. So to me, a cultural value can be like, okay, we value innovation at this company, for example. Let's start this project by talking about what innovation could look like for whatever this next task is or project that we're about to start, and then you can go from there. Now, if a company does not value innovation, that's not one of the cultural values, and maybe their value is sturdiness or pragmatism. They might approach that same project differently. So setting that expectation in the beginning and say, okay, this is what we're going to expect from this can have a whole different conversation.
Hmm. I love that. And on the topic of leadership and leaders in particular, I had a CEO tell me once the worst day for all their employees was the day the boss came back from vacation because they just read a personal development book or a culture book on their vacation, and they want to implement all these ideas. Like, oh crap, what did he read now? What are we gonna do now? And this and I know Donald Trump gets people tease Donald Trump about like he's the last guy thing. Like he'll spout out whatever the last guy told him kind of thing. And CEOs are like that too. The last thing that they read on their vacation is what they're going to implement, at their companies. So tell me about that because it's great that a leader wants to improve
Right.
themselves and be better
Right.
and improve the company. But then there's this whole balance of yeah, but not everyone just read that book you did, and everyone's been working, and then all of a sudden you were like sitting on a beach, and now all of a sudden you want to do all these things. So tell us how we
Right.
strike that balance.
I think one of the worst things leaders can do is too quickly and too often try to change courses or direction. Now, I'm a huge fan of recognizing a VUCA situation. So me, VUCA is a very interesting topic that every employee, every person really needs to recognize. So for those that aren't familiar, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And basically, many situations are VUCA situations. And we could at some point go into more detail on what each one of those would be an example of. But I'll just say, for example, COVID. With COVID, there was volatility. There was a whole lot of things happening at once. We got a little bit of the information, but it took time to get all of it. Uncertainty, we didn't know how long it was going to last. Complexity, there was a lot of potential factors that we weren't sure. So, were the masks working? Do we have to do 6 feet? Like, why 6 feet, not 7 feet, not 5 feet, right? So the complexity of those decisions, and then the ambiguity, the complete unknown, not having all of the components to make decisions. So when I think about a leader who is consistently trying to change course, that is not how you address VUCA. VUCA is having a set sort of skills, decision making, critical thinking, and recognizing you might have to make decisions without having all of the answers. But if leaders are constantly saying, oh, I have a new leadership approach and we're going to do this, or we have a new strategy this year, or we have a new this, we have a new that, that is so fragmented and employees don't shift that easily, especially some that get really personally attached to whatever project they're working on or whatever the most recent approach was. And so leadership is great because we all know basically what a good leader is, right? And we can kind of define it in our own terms. And yes, there are fantastic leadership books out there, but most of them say a lot of the same things, but in different ways. Respect your people, be somebody that they can follow because they think that you have a vision. Make sure that you are focusing on like what the right direction is. Some of the basic stuff with leadership. But when you start throwing in some of these different like terminologies, like when servant leadership came out, I remember that was like, oh, make sure, your people eat first, right? That was the big thing. Make sure the people eat first, go to lunch with them and do things like with the regular people at work. Okay, that's not a bad idea, but there's more to it than that. There's other things you got to consider. So when leaders are so easily distracted by the next pretty thing, that can really be disruptive to a company because there has to be some steadfastness to the approach. But also, and I'm going to harken back to the whole VUCA thing, you also have to be ready to adapt. So you have to do a little bit of a balance of both. And I think that's where fantastic leaders, not good leaders, fantastic leaders do that really well. They really understand where do they need to like keep their head on straight and kind of focus this direction. But when do they say, oh, yep, that's happening here. We need to prepare for that. That is a really interesting balance that I'm not sure all leaders do well, but you can see what companies and their leadership, it does go well. You can see that they have that approach. I'm going to use your example and I'm going to talk about sales for a moment as well. I've been involved in sales for most of my career, either as a sales rep, a sales trainer, leading sales enablement, or even as a sales manager. And sales is really one of those interesting things where all of these companies are trying to make great money by creating a brand new sales process or a brand new questioning process for salespeople. And it's the basics that matter, right? It doesn't matter if I call it, and I'm not going to use any of the terminologies, but if I call it this, or if I call it this, or if I call it this, they all have that same framework that makes sense. So we also have to be careful that we're not just making change to make change and we're kind of not losing sight of the basics because the basics are really what will get you there. The rest of it is extra.
Yeah, no, totally. It's the icing on the cake, and it's so funny. You've been doing this for a while, and I've been doing business podcasts for like 5 years, and so a lot of the terminology, like when you said servant leadership, my eyes rolled back in my head so fast, I like popping out. And
Exactly.
terms like I remember, like you mentioned the pandemic, empathy. Like it took the
Yes.
pandemic for the leaders to learn about empathy because
Yep.
there was a global pandemic. So how?
Unprecedented. That was the other one. Unprecedented.
Oh,
The
unprecedented,
pandemic.
of
Remember?
course.
Unprecedented. Okay.
So how do you go about doing what you do without being so hardened and jaded? I'm a jaded podcaster, so I've seen it all, done it all. But like you, as someone who can't be
Yeah.
jaded, but also still
Yeah.
can probably feel like the hairs on your arms start to raise when someone starts using some of these cheesy words. How do you navigate that world now? Because now, we started this conversation, the fact that we're so much more aware of culture, and we all know all of these fancy words and we know the books that have been written
Yep.
about it. So how are you able to navigate this world that you're living in now, but also knowing that a lot of this stuff has been overused, overplayed, and just over everything in the
Yeah,
last several years?
exactly. Like, people are capitalizing on the commercialism of it. That's the part I kinda have a hard time sometimes, like, how do I make some money off of this new concept? But for me, I am a natural optimist. It's annoying to most people that know me. I remember working with a guy for about 5 years. He was actually a sales rep. I was a trainer for a while, and then I was a sales manager at the company. So he saw me almost every day for about 5 years when I was in an office. And towards the end of that 5 years, he sat down in front of me and he was a grizzled, like veteran sales guy, just like, oh. And he sits down in front of me at my chair and he goes, I keep waiting to see the real Jennifer. And I'm finally realizing you are like this all the time. I was like, yeah, Peter, like I can't fake this for 5 years every day. And I just remember being so amused by that. Like he just was waiting for the real Jennifer to come out, the like real cynical Jennifer. Um, Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not always sunshine and rainbows. Puppy dog tails, yes, but not always sunshine and rainbows. But I think my goal in my heart is always to assume the best from others. And when I am not getting that, I have to figure out what's going on, what their sort of baseline is, because it is easy in a corporate environment. Sometimes you see some things and you go, oh, wow, this is going to be rough. Like, this is going to be rough to get through, or I'm really sorry. I once had a leader of the company that I worked for who told me he has the management style of a seagull, like a seagull.
Bird?
Uh-huh. And he said because he swoops in, takes a shit, and flies away, and it's everybody else's problem. And he said it with no facetiousness, just completely sincere, and walked away. And I went, huh? I hope I don't have to interact with you much because this is going to be difficult. And some of that was pervasive in some of the decisions you could see. You could see how it affected the culture sometimes when he was around. But I'm not going to let that change who I am and how I work. So it is a interesting nuance. And I'd say for me, one of the reasons and one of the ways I can make sure I keep my Jennifer-ism is I really do want and am passionate about other people's development and success for other people. There's a reason why I'm a mentor. There's a reason why when people ask me if I have time to talk about something, I'm always going to say, yes, I can help you with that. I'll try to do my best, whatever you need. I literally have a book me link on my LinkedIn. And I get LinkedIn requests or like booking requests from just random people that heard me on a podcast or saw an article or just saw a post. And they're like, hey, I just want to talk to you about X, Y, and Z, or here's my situation. I'm always going to be that person that says yes, because that just is the right thing to do. And so I can make sure that I maintain that. Now, I do have times that I'm just kind of over it. Like I just need to sit and read a book, or I need to go take my dog for a walk, or I need to go to Zumba and dance it off, whatever it is. But it doesn't last for very long. And I think that part of that is just my nature, and part of it is my strong desire to always make sure that other people are like progressing, moving forward. It's not an accident. I don't think that I was in sales and now I'm in training and development. It just is sort of the core of who I am.
That's awesome. I love it. Her name is Jennifer N. Sutherland. Jennifer, if folks want to work with you, find out more about you. You mentioned LinkedIn, but online, where can they find you?
Yep, www.sutherlandtalentsolutions.com.
Awesome. Jennifer, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Joe.
That's it for this episode of the Authority Company podcast. If you want to build your authority and improve your visibility in your field of expertise, go to theauthoritycompany.com. I'm Joe Pardavila. Until next time, adios.